It is astonishing, really, how often I have to repeat the simplest truths, but perhaps that is simply the condition of the world. People crave complexity. They think that the measure of their intelligence is the intricacy of their methods. They want a clever trick, a market timing strategy, a specific, ephemeral stock ticker. They want the recipe for getting rich quick, which by definition is usually the shortest path to becoming poor slowly. The thumbnail for this discussion points out a painful statistical truth that has haunted us throughout our careers. Most rich people fail. That wealth, once acquired, is often a temporary state. It is a fleeting moment of success, followed by a dramatic collapse, usually self-inflicted. I have observed this pattern over 9 decades, and the pattern rarely deviates. The difference between those who merely get rich and those who stay rich for 60 years, the kind of durable wealth that Warren and I have managed to forge, is not found in what they do, but in what they meticulously, religiously, and sometimes angrily avoid. You asked for the one strategy that saved me. It is not some complex algorithm, and it certainly isn't anything you'll learn in the curriculum of the modern business school, which often seems designed to produce confident but ultimately destructive fools. The strategy is so basic that it offends the sensibilities of the overeducated and the overeager. It is simply this: radical catastrophe avoidance, achieved through the systematic application of the inversion principle. When you look at the vast graveyard of fortunes, businesses, and reputations, and believe me, that graveyard is far larger than the celebrated gallery of winners, you see a constant procession of self-destruction. People don't usually get poor because the world suddenly turned against them. They get poor because they made a fundamental behavioral error they knew, or should have known, to avoid. If you are interested in the strategies that actually work, the strategies that are predicated on the mathematics of compounding interest working for you instead of against you, then I suggest you pay attention. We are going to dive deep into the specific cognitive biases and behavioral errors that act as wrecking balls on wealth. And while we are settling in for what will be a thorough and necessary discussion, because superficial wisdom is usually useless wisdom, I would appreciate it if you took a moment to signal your serious intent by liking this video and subscribing. We are here to talk about durability, which is an increasingly rare commodity in the modern world. If you want to build durable wealth, you must first build durable thinking. Descartes, the delusion of high IQ and high activity. Let us start with the primary reason most smart people fail after achieving some measure of success. They confuse intelligence with wisdom, and they confuse activity with accomplishment. I have known brilliant lawyers, dazzling academics, and spectacularly talented entrepreneurs who built immense fortunes, only to watch them vanish faster than they appeared. Why? Because the intelligence that helped them acquire the money was utterly useless in preserving it. In fact, sometimes high IQ is a disadvantage because it allows the holder to construct more elaborate and convincing rationalizations for their own poor behavior. The first great error, the one that makes wealth temporary, is the belief that success means you are now infallible. This is the oldest story in human history. Hubris. Once people achieve success, maybe they made a killing in real estate, or they timed a market trend correctly, or they sold a successful company, they stop relying on the bedrock principles that got them there: hard work, frugality, focus, and start relying on their own supposed genius. They feel they must expand, they must leverage, they must intervene, they must show the world they can do it again, only bigger and faster. This leads directly to the second great error, which is the addiction to activity. Modern finance encourages constant motion. You have to trade, you have to restructure, you have to diversify across 1,000 mediocre assets. You have to hire consultants to tell you complicated nonsense you don't need to know. Warren and I found success by sitting on our backsides. We practiced profound patience. We waited for the obvious, wonderful opportunity, the fat pitch, and when it came, we swung hard. The rest of the time, we did nothing. People think we are sophisticated investors because of our returns. The truth is, we are sophisticated avoiders of investment. We avoid 99% of the opportunities presented to us because they fail the threshold test of simplicity, predictability, and quality. If you want to understand how to preserve wealth over 6 decades, you must start by understanding that the standard Wall Street playbook is designed for high transaction volume, which is excellent for generating fees and terrible for generating durable wealth. High transaction volume is the inverse of intelligent action. It guarantees that you will be constantly paying taxes, constantly incurring transaction costs, and constantly increasing the probability of making a catastrophic mistake. The strategy of inversion, guaranteed failure avoidance, the central pillar of my thinking, the mechanism that has saved us from ruin countless times, is the rigorous and constant application of the inversion principle. When I want to know how to succeed, I first ask, how can I guarantee failure? Then I meticulously catalog the causes of failure and dedicate my life to avoiding them. This isn't just clever wordplay. It's a profound shift in mental orientation. Most people approach wealth creation like this. What is the best possible stock I can buy right now? I approach wealth preservation like this. What are the ways I can guarantee losing everything? And how can I erect impenetrable defenses against those specific vectors of doom? The difference is crucial. The first approach seeks the ephemeral maximum gain. The second seeks to eliminate the maximum pain. Since truly colossal success is achieved primarily through the power of compounding interest working uninterruptedly over long periods, the greatest threat to wealth is interruption, the catastrophic loss that resets the clock to 0. Let me list the 3 primary ways rich people guarantee failure, and then we will discuss the defenses we built. 1. Leverage and debt. Using too much debt is the financial equivalent of playing Russian roulette. If you are right 9 out of 9 times and wrong just once, you are wiped out. The rich often mistake a clever use of credit for genius, and when markets tighten or interest rates rise or their specific venture hits a snag, the obligation remains. We ran Berkshire Hathaway without substantial leverage for decades. We never wanted to be forced to sell a wonderful asset at a terrible price simply because some banker decided we needed to meet a margin call on a Tuesday. We always planned for the worst winter. If you rely on good luck for survival, you are practicing self-deception. 2. Envy and comparison. Once people have a respectable fortune, they look at the truly grotesque fortunes being made by others, usually temporary, high flyers, and feel inadequate. This psychological trap is perhaps the most destructive force known to man. Envy is the one sin that is no fun at all. It makes you miserable and compels you to take stupid, disproportionate risks just to catch up to an arbitrary metric set by some neighbor or competitor. We ignored the noise. We focused only on our own scorecard, our own businesses, and our own ethical standards. If you are comparing your stable, durable 12% return to someone else's speculative 50% return, you are setting yourself up for financial suicide. 3. Cognitive bias run wild. The Lollapalooza effect. People stop thinking straight. Success breeds arrogance, which is just another term for confirmation bias. They surround themselves with sycophants. Social proof. They anchor their value to their highest historical point, anchoring effect. And because they got rich doing X, they believe they must double down on X, even when X is clearly changing or failing. Consistency and commitment tendency. When several biases combine, which is what I call a Lollapalooza effect, the result is financial ruin, often appearing inevitable only in retrospect. The rich fail because their own minds betray them. This brings me to the absolute necessity of rigorous self-examination, which is the only reliable antidote to the psychological destruction of success. Building defenses, the mental models of preservation. Our strategy was not about achieving brilliance, it was about achieving continuous rationality. To do this, we constructed a latticework of mental models. These are tools used to check reality against our own internal desires and biases. If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and you will eventually hammer yourself into the poorhouse. We needed a comprehensive toolbox. Model 1. The circle of competence, knowing your edge. The most reliable way rich people lose money is by straying outside the things they genuinely understand. They get excited by the next big thing, whether it's crypto or derivatives or an industry utterly foreign to them, and they mistake a charismatic salesperson for a genuine opportunity. Warren and I defined our circle ruthlessly. If we couldn't understand the fundamental business model, the competitive advantages, and the predictable future cash flows, we tossed the idea out. We looked for things we could understand at a deep, physical level. Insurance float, high-quality manufacturing, predictable consumer products. If you don't know the edge of your circle, you have no circle. You must spend immense effort defining the boundaries of what you truly know, and then maintain the discipline of staying inside them. The world will tempt you daily to wander off into fields of clover, but clover is often concealing a large hole. Preserving wealth requires intellectual humility, the willingness to say, "I don't know," and walk away even when everyone else is making money. Temporary FOMO is far cheaper than permanent capital loss. Model 2. Fiduciary duty and reputation, the ethical filter. You might not immediately think of ethics as a wealth preservation strategy, but in the long run, it is perhaps the most important defense. We operated on the principle that a great reputation is the ultimate competitive advantage, and that we must deserve the incredible trust placed in us by our shareholders. If you acquire wealth through shady dealings, clever loopholes, or by mistreating your partners, that wealth is built on quicksand. Eventually, the law catches up. The market realizes your ethical flexibility, or your partners turn against you. The compounded cost of managing a bad reputation is astronomical. Our ethical standard was simple: never transact business with people we do not admire and trust, and always behave in a way that, if it were reported on the front page of the newspaper, would not embarrass us. This ethical filter prevents you from entering catastrophic partnerships, avoids expensive legal and regulatory messes, and ensures that the long-term compounding machine, the business, is built on solid, immovable ground. Trustworthiness is a powerful moat. Just last. Model 3. Opportunity cost. The mathematics of avoidance. Most people understand opportunity cost intellectually, but few use it as a behavioral model. When we decided to preserve wealth, we understood that every dollar we held and didn't invest was implicitly invested at the rate of return of the next best opportunity available to us. However, The real power of opportunity cost is applied to our time and our attention. Every hour spent chasing speculative garbage is an hour taken away from deeply researching the one or two truly great businesses that will move the needle. Every decision to buy a mediocre asset is a decision to forego the ability to deploy capital when a truly exceptional bargain appears during a financial panic. The strategy of preservation requires large amounts of cash and mental bandwidth reserved for the fat pitch. Most rich people fail because they are fully invested, fully engaged, and fully distracted when the genuine opportunity arrives. They confuse the necessity of having capital available with the supposed necessity of having that capital always earning a meager return. I would much rather hold cash and have the option to buy a truly great business at a distressed price than be locked into 100 mediocre assets that are merely fine. Cash optionality is a tremendous weapon for preservation. Durskheim, Model 4. Psychological denial, the refusal to accept reality. When a rich person sees their fortune starting to decline, perhaps due to a bad investment or a changing market, they engage in one of the most destructive behaviors, denial. This is often amplified by the incentive-caused bias. If a manager is paid based on the size of the assets under management, they will fight tooth and nail to avoid reducing those assets, even if the prudent course of action is liquidation. The rich person who owns a failing business or a declining stock portfolio often refuses to cut their losses because doing so means admitting they were wrong. A massive blow to the ego that success has inflated. Inversion demands we ask, what is the cost of staying in this position if I am definitively wrong? We always sought to face reality immediately, regardless of how painful the short-term outcome looked. If a business was fundamentally deteriorating due to technological or competitive shifts, we sold it. We never fell in love with a stock, a business, or an idea. We were loyal to rational analysis, not to past decisions. The preservation strategy requires the courage to admit error quickly and decisively. The first loss is often the cheapest. The true cost of complexity and the virtue of frugality. Let us talk about the behavioral aspects that corrode wealth from the inside out. The rich often fail because they scale their lifestyles faster than their sustainable income. When you start making serious money, the world offers you every imaginable complexity. Private jets, vast property portfolios, multiple divorces, complicated trust structures, and an army of advisors whose primary incentive is to make your life more complex so they can justify their own enormous fees. The preservation strategy demands a permanent commitment to simplicity and frugality, not in the sense of penny pinching, but in the sense of avoiding unnecessary burdens. When you buy a yacht, you don't just buy a boat. You buy a captain, a crew, insurance, dockage, maintenance, and the constant psychological burden of managing a floating asset that depreciates rapidly. This is complexity working against you. It consumes time, money, and focus, the very resources needed to maintain and grow the core wealth engine. Warren and I kept our lives remarkably simple. We drove modest cars, lived in the same houses for decades, and avoided the consumptions. Arms race. This wasn't because we couldn't afford otherwise. It was a strategic choice. By keeping fixed expenses low and complexity minimized, we preserved our mental clarity and maintained a vast psychological moat against financial pressure. If you are not desperate for cash flow because your lifestyle demands continuous growth, you are far more capable of practicing the patience required for superior investing. Frugality is not just about saving money. It is about preserving optionality. and minimizing the psychological stress that forces bad decisions. Most rich people fail because they become slaves to their expenses, forcing them into high-risk behavior they would have otherwise avoided. They put themselves in a position where the margin of error is zero. We always built massive margins of safety in our balance sheets and our lives. The antidote to temporary success, the compounding of goodwill. If I have to condense the 60 years of success into a single operational concept, it is this: understand the Lollapalooza effect of compounding and ensure that every major force in your life is compounding in your favor. Most people only think of compound interest in terms of returns on capital. That is amateur thinking. Everything compounds. Debt compounds. Hatred compounds. Ignorance compounds. And goodwill compounds. The strategy that saved me involves focusing relentlessly on the elements that compound positively and avoiding the elements that compound negatively. Negative compounding, the path to ruin. 1. Compound debt. We discussed this. Leveraging a good asset turns a mild recession into a catastrophe. 2. Compound bad habits. Procrastination, poor health decisions, lack of reading. These small failures accumulate until they erode your capacity for high performance when it matters most. 3. Compound bad partnerships. Marrying the wrong person, partnering with an unreliable individual, associating with dishonest advisors. These choices consume your energy and capital at an accelerating, compounding rate. Positive compounding, the path to durable wealth. 1. Compound knowledge. I read constantly across multiple disciplines: psychology, biology, history, physics. This multidisciplinary approach builds the lattice work of mental models. The more models you have, the less likely you are to be fooled by the narrow, single-discipline thinking of the crowd. Knowledge is the only asset that truly appreciates without limit. 2. Compound trust and goodwill. Every time you deliver on a promise, treat a counterparty fairly, or refuse to take the cheap shot, you are adding to your reservoir of trust. This reservoir is invaluable during a crisis. When things turn sour, the people who trust you will stick with you, lend you money, or sell you assets. The dishonest person finds the whole world closing in on them during a recession. 3. Compound reputation. This means maintaining a sterling reputation with regulators, competitors, and the public. This gives you political and social license to operate without unnecessary friction, fines, or interference. It reduces the costs of running a business immensely. If you focus on compounding these non-financial assets, trust, reputation, and knowledge, the financial compounding will take care of itself, provided you practice the first rule: radical avoidance of catastrophe. Applying the filter: how we stayed inside the box. Let me illustrate the application of this strategy using historical context. During the dot-com mania of the late 1990s, everyone, including many who had accumulated substantial paper wealth, felt compelled to participate in the frenzy. They accused Warren and me of being old economy dinosaurs. We were mocked for holding cash and avoiding technology stocks we didn't understand, and for buying predictable, dull businesses like utilities and railroads. The pressure to conform was immense. That pressure, that fear of looking stupid by missing out, is one of the most powerful psychological forces leading the newly rich into ruin. They mistake a speculative bubble driven by mass delusion for a fundamental economic shift. We applied the inversion principle. What happens if this euphoria turns out to be temporary mass insanity? The answer was clear. Those leveraging high-priced, unprofitable companies would be wiped out entirely. The people who were smart but lacked discipline would be forced into painful liquidation. Our strategy was simple. Do nothing. Wait. Hold cash. Stick to the businesses we understood. Businesses that, even if they declined, would still be worth a substantial amount because they generated actual cash flow and did not rely on speculative greater fool theory. When the bubble burst, as every bubble inevitably does, we were not only preserved, but we had the dry powder, the cash we had been mocked for holding, to acquire genuinely great assets from people who were forced to sell due to the leverage and psychological damage they had inflicted upon themselves. This is the ultimate competitive advantage of the non-leveraged, psychologically disciplined investor. When everyone else is panicking and forced to sell, you are the only one capable of buying. The majority of rich people fail because they are psychologically ill-equipped to sit out periods of euphoria. They confuse courage with recklessness. Preservation requires the quiet, uncelebrated courage to be different, to look dull, and to miss some temporary upside in order to preserve permanent capital. The final grumpy rule: the margin of safety in everything. The concept of the margin of safety, borrowed from engineering, is non-negotiable in wealth preservation. It is the final defense against the inevitable surprises the universe throws at you. We never assumed our projections would be perfectly correct. We never assumed the economy would be flawless. We always assumed we were making mistakes somewhere. Therefore, our investment decisions, our capital structure, and our personal spending always had massive slack, a huge buffer zone. If we thought a company was worth $10, we wanted to buy it for $6, maybe $5. If we thought we needed $1 million to retire comfortably, we aimed for $3 million. Most rich people fail because they operate right up against the edge of their capacity. They use the maximum leverage allowed by the bank. They assume the highest rate of return possible. They operate with no slack. When the unexpected tax bill, the unexpected lawsuit, or the unexpected market crash arrives, and it will arrive, they have no defenses left, and they are forced into distress. The strategy that saved me, the strategy that saved our fortunes and allowed us to compound wealth for 60 continuous years, is entirely predicated on rejecting that kind of precision. Precision in finance is often a delusion. We prefer vagueness on the upside and certainty on the downside. We insist on a margin of safety so large that ordinary garden variety bad luck cannot wipe us out. If you maintain this discipline, if you meticulously avoid the pitfalls of debt, envy, overactivity, and complexity, if you apply inversion daily, and if you build a wide margin of safety into every aspect of your life, you will find that success is not a fleeting moment of genius, but the inevitable consequence of continuous sanity. It is a dull, slow, and wonderfully dependable process. Now, go and practice some avoidance. That, more than anything else, will keep you rich.